I can't believe that we've come down to that. And I don't know. We don't go to the movie theater to be lectured to and to have somebody throw their ideology onto us. I wonder if it'll be successful.
We're talking about Superman. We're talking about Superman. More importantly, Supergirl. So I'm trying something new. I posted the essay that corresponds with this video on Substack. So it was there first. I intend to, for future videos, post abridged versions of them to Substack, so then the full thing can be experienced here on YouTube. But in this case, what I had to say about this was kind of succinct. So they are essentially the same. So if you are less auditory and would rather just read the content of this video, Substack is the place to go. James Gunn's 2025 Superman. It was a hope reset, even if only for a very brief moment in time. I was not, and arguably still am not, much of a Superman fan in particular. Not even for any specific reason. I'm just not particularly a superhero inclined person, except for Spider-Man. The Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield movies have special places in my heart, although I like all Spider-Men equally. The whole point is that anyone can be Spider-Man. I digress. I wasn't even aware that the 2025 Superman was coming out until maybe a month prior to its release. I'm normally pretty slow to the popular movie uptake. I tend to have a bad habit of watching things very, very late, well after they've come out, very often, sometimes years after they've come out. But the film, it was already buzzing a kind of hype that even I couldn't avoid. And after its release, my social media was inundated with just these spectacular edits and hype around the movie. And so I decided that this one, it was probably worth making an effort to go see in theaters. I was humming "'Cause I'm a punk rocker, yes I am," before even getting to the theater. And I loved it. I loved every second of the movie. And I wept throughout almost the entirety of it. Pretty much like minute 5, I was crying. But not for Superman, not for the power of a good superhero film, not even because this movie had an arguably phenomenal love story between Lois and Clark. I wept while watching this movie for Palestine. Superman hit theaters July 11th, riding the unavoidable coattails of months of promised and abandoned ceasefire, inhumane blockades preventing life-saving aid, bombing, terror, hatred, I feel obvious disclaimer. I unfortunately have to censor certain words out of the algorithmic tendency to censor videos that talk about certain topics. Not that I necessarily care about getting views in particular, but I think this is important to speak about, so I would rather not it be completely blocked from people's view entirely because I say certain words. Now, we know that the occupation and destruction of Palestine and her people didn't begin in 2025. It didn't even begin October 3rd, 2023. It didn't even begin, if you are familiar with the 1948 Nakba, or in 1947, when the UN General Assembly unjustly tore Palestine into a split state, ripping apart a land for is not real that was not theirs to take. Claim to power over Palestine dates all the way back to 1799, involving an attempted colonization from Napoleon, and then years later, the direct involvement of the British Empire amidst the decline of the Ottoman Empire. Everything that I've just said is a severely abridged summary, meant to simply highlight the depth and length that runs through the river of Palestine's history, though the focus of this piece is a reflection on more recent cultural responses to the Palestinian genocide. Know that the content of this video barely even begins to address the full scope of what has transpired and what is transpiring now. Now, one thing is incredibly simple to understand. The genocide in Palestine is happening, and for the past few years, global visibility has skyrocketed to a level that's never been seen before. I myself was not aware of what was happening in Palestine until 2023. I will not deny this fact about myself or shy away from disclosing it, as I think a lot of people tend to do. The shame around not knowing is a valid human emotion, but also pretending like the suppression of information in the US doesn't exist, or acting like your political journey doesn't grow and change with time and experience. It's foolish to pretend that that's not real. The colonial powers, propaganda, and political and journalistic suppression that come from the United States and is not real are unfortunately rather good at what they do. So yes, I was one of the many who was not particularly in touch about this particular moment in our global conscious until 2023. To quote activist Angela Davis,
Palestine is really the center of the world. I do think that even as we cry, even as we express solidarity amidst the suffering, we should recognize that this is a moment we've been waiting for, where people all over the world are recognizing Palestine as a litmus test.
As Miss Davis says, the world in this moment has reached a peaked political and humanitarian interest, one that is so impossible to ignore. Even everyday folks could not help but turn their attention to Palestine. This happened for a number of reasons, a combination of rapid and consistent access to firsthand accounts via social media, in addition to a wave of political awakening across the board amidst the re-election of Trump. Certainly, that all absolutely played a role in the public's ability to at least be aware of Palestine. For some people, this was a momentary blip in time, just another thing to be concerned about and repost on social media till attention died down. For many other people, including myself, life has been permanently altered for both better and for worse, and Palestine and her people gained an insurmountable number of allies and advocates. I do not wish to return to a life where I did not think of Palestine daily. And so also, all that to be said, James Gunn's Superman released, and the similarities were undeniable. Hello there, editing me here. Just to take a moment to add some clarification, some clarity before the rest of this video. I want to make it very clear that this video, although it is discussing things such as film analysis, such as theories of art and audience participation, at the end of the day, the utmost reason why the political content discussed is necessary to speak about at an analytical level is not because it makes good storytelling. It's not because people need to speak on behalf of the lived experiences of a marginalized group of people. The importance of this topic being discussed is because it is the responsibility of all peoples to draw their attention to and do what they can to aid those being oppressed, those being targeted, those being attacked. So just know, as the video continues and I spend my time discussing the role that art and film plays, though it is of course important to discuss film and to discuss art, there is nothing more important than voices and experience of those who are actually living through said genocide. So while this piece is a small perspective in the grand scheme of things, it should not be the only perspective. And as I mentioned in the video, it is important to seek out sources, film, art, journalism by Palestinians directly. Just making that very clear. James Gunn's Superman is stuffed to the brim with brilliant and persistent hope. This rendition of Clark Kent presented to us is one that is riddled with an insurmountable amount of guilt at never being able to do enough, and a deep intrinsic love for all life. Doing what is right for all people supersedes any other priority, including geopolitical and economic ones. So at this point, I am going to walk us through a little bit of the plot of Superman. So spoilers for Superman and spoilers for Supergirl lie ahead. Fret not, this is not just a summary video of the plots of the two movies. So in Superman, it takes place in the aftermath of Clark having stopped the fictional country of Boravia from invading their direct geographical neighbors, the fictional country of Jarhanpur. Audiences speculate, at least online, there is strong evidence that the maps displayed in the movie for these countries mimic, or at least inspired by, real-world mapping of geography somewhere between Eastern Europe and West Asia, just in the way that the two countries are portrayed culturally, visibly, linguistically. You can kind of already see where inspiration from real life has been drawn. Conversations throughout the film address varied perspectives on the geopolitical conflict that Superman has inserted himself into.
In fact, you illegally entered a country, inserting yourself in the middle of an incredibly
Hold on a
heated
minute.
geopolitical
Hold on a
situation.
second.
Siding with a nation, Jarhanpur, which historically has not been a friend
Jarhanpur
to the US,
has
against a nation that's technically our ally.
Whether or not Jarhanpur is an imperfect country does not give another nation the right to
Yes, but the
invade it.
Boravian government maintains they're freeing the Jarhanpurians from a tyrannical regime.
Yes, but you know that's very silly.
I do?
The Boravian government of all people is saying this? Come on.
Yeah, I would question myself in the same situation and hold off a beat and consider the consequences.
People were going to die.
That conversation, I mean, it's undeniable. It could still make complete sense replacing Boravia with Israel and Jarhanpur with Palestine, and it would still make absolute sense what they're talking about. As the film continues, a secondary conflict unfolds. The general public begins to distrust Superman and his motives, and this is bolstered by footage that has been released. When Superman landed on Earth, his parents left him a video. He had only ever seen the first half of it. Having never seen the full video, it is revealed in the second half that his parents wanted him to conquer Earth for himself. Because of this, Superman faces a crisis of identity and motivation as the world turns its back on him. The general assumption of the public is his assistance of the Jarhanpurians means that he is against the United States and its people. The movie proudly and unapologetically carries themes of the cost of nationalism, and it displays how people unquestioningly believe in the motives of the country they reside in. In the context of this movie, we're talking about Americans. Also, an obvious metaphor represented through Clark Kent himself, the blatant usage of the word alien to describe him carries a significant weight throughout the film, given his forced immigration to the planet Earth after the total destruction of his own home. It adds an additional layer to Superman's protection of the Jarhanpurian people. He understands the impact of the loss of one's home and culture, and he is not defined as a superhero by his loyalty to the geographical entity of the United States or its political allyship to other countries such as Israel. Boravia. The film is also not subtle at all in its allusion to the role that private equity, unchecked wealth, and financial gain as motivations for war. Movie's primary antagonist, tech billionaire Lex Luthor, is revealed to have financially backed much of Boravia's war efforts in exchange for half of Jarhanpur's land once conquered. Everything essentially but the names directly copied the real-life efforts of Trump to build luxury resorts on top of the leveled land of Gaza, financially backed by real-world tech billionaires such as Sam Altman and Peter Thiel. Absolutely disgusting and horrendous. To be quite honest, even though it is incredibly jarring, it is a refreshingly honest portrayal of the motivations behind colonization and war. Unlike many other movies addressing this topic, Superman doesn't paint Baravia's conquering of Jarhanpur or Lex Luthor's involvement as a misunderstood conflict enacted by men who are evil just because they hate people. That's definitely a perspective that plays a role. What the movie really does is it paints a wealthy billionaire and the political figure he takes advantage of as nothing more than self-centered, greedy, power-hungry people, as well as very uncool, lame losers. I love that it is not shy about pointing them in that light as well. The movie shows that these people are motivated by a desire to conquer land and acquire more wealth. And it's less born out of their, spiritual or philosophical hatred of a specific group of people. And it pulls back another layer and says, okay, well, actually, what is often racially motivated or culturally motivated conflict can often really underneath it all be boiled down to monetary capitalistic interest. The people of the said land of Jarhanpur are roadblocks in the way of the villain's acquisition of wealth. Their lives are in danger merely as a symptom of war, not the cause of it. I also think it's worth noting here that the revelation that Lex Luthor is not even really caring that much about the money of it all. He's willing to risk his financial assets throughout the film. He makes it very clear that the physical property that he owns is not a concern to him because it's implied in his mind he can always just make or buy more. And so ultimately the conflict is really rooted in his singular hatred for Superman, which when you think about it, Superman being an embodiment of not only the immigrant experience, but the experience of all people who fight for liberation and equity. Lex Luthor is just jealous. He's jealous. And so he's willing to go through insurmountable financial loss and ruin of his social status for nothing else if but the fact that he cannot stand that somebody like Superman is successful in any capacity.
I think you overestimate the importance of Jarhanpur to me, Superman. That was just a bonus. I'm not killing you so the Baravian military conflict can proceed. I created the Baravian military conflict so I'd have an excuse to kill you.
Very intelligent writing in my, just really phenomenal. Numerous metaphors happening here that are just wonderfully written. However, James Gunn, the writer, director, producer, has denied any outright direct intention in creating the film and its parallels to the Palestinian genocide. He says, when I wrote this, the Middle Eastern conflict wasn't happening, so I tried to do little things to move it away from that, but it doesn't have anything to do with the Middle East. It really is fictional. Side note, I will admit this is another thing that I learned very recently in my life. James Gunn's usage of the term Middle East is an outdated colonial term, right? Because it for one is Eurocentric because it's speaking about the Middle East of Europe. Two, it is a term imposed upon an incredibly diverse, culturally, politically, geographically diverse region. So it is a term, while not necessarily, I don't think James Gunn was ill-intended in the usage of this term, because we do have to acknowledge that it is a term that has been normalized and standardized in our education systems. It's one we should actively try to move away from. The recommendation is if you are going to generalize the region to refer to it as West Asia. That's just a little side tangent there as I read the quote. No, I myself am not endorsing the term. Whether James Gunn says the movie is about Palestine or not, public reception received the movie as such on both sides of the political spectrum. As an audience member who chooses to view the film from that lens myself, even if the intention behind Superman was not as well thought out and truly was just a major coincidence, its impact and storytelling is enough for James Gunn's intentions to not really matter to me. From a philosophical standpoint, that's what I enjoy the most about art, what I call the 1/3 ownership rule. 1/3 of ownership in any form of theater or film belongs to the creator themselves, what they intended their work to be and why they told the story the way that they did. So James Gunn could have sat down and been like, yeah, this is truly just a generalized metaphor about a superhero. Then the second portion of ownership is informed by the performers and technicians working on the piece itself, because the director and or writer hands the piece to them, says, okay, now it's your turn to represent it, whether it be through your technical work or your acting work. And how they interpret the work and their performance also influences how the piece is perceived. The final third of ownership, and the third, in my opinion, that is arguably the most important, is the audience, because theater and film without an audience is not theater and film. It's just a bunch of people doing something in a room by themselves. An audience's interpretation of a work and its impact is a vital and necessary component to the art experience, even if their interpretation of a piece is varied from the creator's or the actor's intentions. I am a playwright. That is one of the things that I do in the art world. And I am of the opinion that it doesn't really matter what an artist intended their piece to be. If an audience is interpreting it otherwise, then that is the impact that that piece leaves, right? Because you shouldn't need secondary material to understand the impact of a piece. You shouldn't need to look up interviews afterwards or things like that. And so if an artist is upset with how people have perceived their piece and are saying things like, oh, well, you did not get it, that wasn't my intention, they didn't do a good job of executing their idea. Sorry, be mad about it. Now, with that being said, we, of course, have no confirmation of this, but James Gunn absolutely could have intended for the movie to be received the way that it was, and perhaps is denying its similarity to the Palestinian genocide because he is perhaps aware that he would have been stopped from making the movie if he was overt in his acknowledgement of it. It's kind of like the Luca argument. A lot of people will ask me like, oh, well, why do you think Luca is good queer representation if it's not overt in its queerness? To which I say, one, it is incredibly overt. But two, if they had made the movie any more obviously queer, it probably would not have been released by Disney. And parents of queer children who may have needed to see the movie would not have let their kids watched it. But by it being just subtle enough where people could like wave it away and have plausible deniability, but then the audience that needs to receive that messaging still absolutely understands what's going on, it is able to reach more people. Do we know that that's what's happening here with Superman? No. Is that a plausible theory? I think so. So audiences, they ran with it. We did what the thesis of the film was calling us to do. We clung to hope. Hope that if even for a brief moment we could see our geopolitical reality and horror reflected back at us on screen with a conclusion that demanded hope from you, because if nothing else, you must fight the good fight. Again, it helped that the film literally centered the story of an immigrant as its protagonist. And that I know James Gunn was overt in acknowledging. I do believe he used the word immigrant to describe Superman. I'm pretty sure that's what stirred up the whole like Superwoke controversy. This is why I'm now going to burst that bubble of hope and to say the following, which is Supergirl 2026 was a really bad movie. I thought it was pretty bad. And I was not surprised at all. Before we dive into Supergirl specifically, I'd like to pause here to introduce the concept of third cinema. Third cinema is a term coined by Argentinian filmmakers Fernando Solanas and Octavio Getino. To understand third cinema, you must also understand the terms of first and second cinema. All three of these terms are used to not only categorize movies themselves, but also to provide an outline and a definition for the various political stances that a movie could take. First cinema is the first tier, and it is the majority of popular cinema. First cinema is more often than not made by corporate or wealthy entities or people. On a political level, first cinema is created to be enjoyed by the masses and for profit. No matter how well-intentioned, no matter how political it may purport itself to be, all film made by major industry, so in the American sense, Hollywood, is first cinema. So even this includes cinema that embodies the same structural model and procedures as a major cinema industry. So even a movie that or production company that might define itself as indie, such as A24, although how indie can you be when you sell out to generative AI? I don't know. But even these companies are first cinema. So like a really good example is Boots Riley's most recent movie, Boosters, despite the fact that he himself has declared it a socialist piece of work, it is still a capitalist first cinema film. I got thoughts about that one too. That might be a video for another day, but I digress. I would also even say, in my personal opinion, independent film that you might make with your friends, like a short film, if it is still structurally ran under the standards that Hollywood operates under, so how you pay people, the pursuit of film festivals as metrics for success, a hierarchy of status amongst cast and crew, also still counts as first cinema. Another argument for another day. Second cinema is art house cinema. It's film made for an aesthetic purpose. It is films that reject Hollywood, but still focus on the sole vision of the people working on the film. Second cinema is still not yet anti-capitalist because it prioritizes superficial values like aesthetic and individual goals. It cares more about what the creators of the film think of the film and their intention behind it. Auteur film, essentially, a lot of the movies that you're going to see in some dude's Letterboxd top 5 are probably second cinema. Third cinema is revolutionary in nature, with the film itself only being a portion of the experience. It is anti-imperialist, anti-colonialist, and most importantly, it is an activator. It is a catalyst. Third cinema actively acknowledges its viewers as participants of the film experience, and it equips them with the emotional motivation, guidelines, and perhaps even like a literal direct call to action to expand the viewing experience into a motivator for communal liberation. Knowing now these definitions and the thought process behind it, it doesn't take much to see that despite the potential takeaway from audiences, Superman is first cinema. So naturally, Supergirl was not going to be any different. Supergirl could have been a deliberate addressing of what Superman tiptoed around. And I say tiptoed just because even though it's like, obvious to you and me what we can take away from the movie Superman, it's still tiptoed around its themes ultimately because they never directly called it what it was. Supergirl follows Kara, Clark Kent's cousin, who actively witnessed the remaining destruction of their home planet. She was sent to Earth to escape the slow sickness that was killing off her people, and in the aftermath, she's left to remember an entire culture and population and its history completely alone. The film has Supergirl embarking on a journey to find an antidote for her dog and companion Crypto, who has been poisoned by a bandit group called the Brigands. And a very important part to acknowledge here in this video is that the Brigands are known for kidnapping and enslaving women, enforcing them into sexual slavery in particular. Supergirl could have been a continued sensitive exploration and expansion of the refugee and immigrant experience. And it could have been paired with fabulous exploration of an incredibly real tactic of conquest and domination, femicide and assault, right? Because Superman embodied the immigrant experience of perhaps what would be considered a first generation immigrant, somebody who perhaps does not necessarily have cultural ties directly to their homeland in a memory or historical or experienced sense, but is still aware that they don't quite belong where they're at now. And on the political end of the movie, it explored the role that tech capitalism plays in domination of people's culture and land, and in response to that, how the general public responds to having to question the institutions around them that they love so dearly. And so Supergirl could have been a fabulous exploration of, okay, what about the refugee experience of somebody who does remember their home, misses it dearly, and is completely alone in that experience. And then from a political standpoint, you have an entire plot line surrounding the conquest of women, and specifically young women. The movie makes an extensive point that the Brigands take young girls in particular, and the role that that plays in conquest, in domination. All of that in mind, Kara, having been left to quite literally float aimlessly after the loss of her family, her culture, her planet. If her film had been approached with the care and detail that Superman was, it could have been an objectively good film, even if once more they did not maybe intentionally make it that way, but the audience once again could imbue their own political meaning onto the film. It still would have been pretty good, I think. Instead, Supergirl is an incredibly bland montage of Kara fighting poorly written bad guys with plot sprinkled in occasionally. It's worth noting, I've described to you the general idea of the film, and I haven't even mentioned one of the key components of the movie, which is Supergirl has an unlikely partnership with a young girl named Ruthie, who is also in pursuit of the Brigands for her own personal reasons because they murdered her family. Despite the fact that Ruthie is the catalyst for the film's adventure, and the movie portrays her as the inspiration for Kara's character growth, Ruthie is watered down to pretty much nothing more than someone Supergirl has to repeatedly save over and over, and her dialogue is largely just there to give Kara's character an excuse to flash back on her homeland through brief snippets of conversation. The plot line involving the women that the Brigands capture is, in my opinion, the worst part of the movie. They are watered down to nothing more than a collective of symbolic women lumped into a monolith. They're saved at the last minute, at the end, en masse, and nobody in the film, in an intentional or care-driven way, addresses the horrifying implications of their enslavement, not even from Kara in particular. It's kind of treated as this the bad guys are bad because they sexually assault. Whoa. As I said before, I was kind of not surprised by any of this. I hate to say it, but I went into this movie with very low expectations because despite the impact that Superman had on me personally, on a number of people culturally, it's still first cinema. Supergirl is first cinema. That doesn't mean that the movies have no importance or cultural impact. And it doesn't even mean that you're not allowed to enjoy them. But Superman, let's call it what it is, a multi-million-dollar film made by a multi-million-dollar production company, made by a director and writer who thrives within the exploitative and anti-political industry of Hollywood. The actors of the movie fall under the same umbrella. No one who was in the cast came forward to outwardly and deliberately acknowledge the film's political themes, and the film still made millions of dollars for an industry that directly oppresses and censors the voices of Palestinian filmmakers. And before anybody says it, well, if they had acknowledged it, like they could have lost their jobs, like maybe it was in their contracts. I don't care. I don't give a goodness gracious flying fuck. We've got Miss Rachel out here working her tail. Hate messages left, right, and center. Has it actually affected her career that much? No. People who worked on the film, particularly the three main actors of the press tour, most certainly would have been fine. I figured it was safe to assume Supergirl was going to safely assimilate itself back into the Hollywood mold. Whether Superman was intentional in its politics or not, it was an unusual case. That's part of why it stirred up such a storm, because a movie so overt in its political themes is not the norm. At the end of the day, these movies are first cinema made by people who profit from the systems that bolster first cinema. Anything that comes out of Hollywood will never be third cinema. It will never be overtly anti-imperialist. It will never be overtly anti-colonialist. It will never be overtly anti-genocide. It will never be an overt liberatory piece of art that we desire when it's coming from a system of mass compliance itself. Also, I still like the Superman movie. I'll probably watch it a third time in the future. Do I wish that we lived in a world where third cinema ran rampant across the cultural conscious, motivating people through art so intentionally that it causes audiences to not only think of Palestine, but to, upon viewing, immediately get up out of their seats, exit the theater, and revolt for a better future? God, I wish we lived in that world. I can only hope that we eventually end up in that world. And do I also think that genuine hope and meaning created by those working against colonial powers, everyday people like you and me, is necessary to find anywhere and everywhere, even from a first cinema superhero movie? Also, yes, Superman provided a vision of hope to those watching. It allowed immigrants and those affected by genocide to see a mainstream movie take their side for once. It still has its flaws, it absolutely does, but for the most part, it is one of the most holistic mainstream films that has positively contributed to this conversation. It was a movie that was overt in its anti-billionaire-ness, and it directly told audiences just because a political power is an ally of the United States, it doesn't mean that they're good, and it doesn't mean that United States is good either. I don't really know what Supergirl provided, to be quite honest. I think it is awash with lifeless Hollywood definition of what they think feminism looks like. I think it completely destroyed what could have been a fabulous foundation for her character, and I think it mishandled its political themes every step of the way. I encourage you to watch movies created by folks working towards actual real-world liberation. The Voice of Hind Rajab, The Encampments, and I also encourage you to go to queercinemaforpalestine.org and watch any of their screenings there. I myself attended one recently, and the short films that I saw were absolutely spectacular. I highly recommend you check out their website. I really do believe we will get to a future where we will not need to rely on the mainstream to be good enough for now, and liberatory art will be the popular and preferred choice. I think we are already headed in that direction. I do also believe that hope and meaning that an audience might imbue into a mainstream film is also an important step and necessary step in the process of creating a future that is dominated by liberatory and direct and intentional art. At the end of the day, it is not a bad lesson to take away from a film that we should take evil, uncaring dictators and drop them from the sky to the ground below.